these upper intertidal rocks, the issue is about free space. And the various animals that live here, most of them really need to have space. So the easiest ones to understand are the barnacles. And so here we have lots of the small grayish barnacle Thamellus. And things to appreciate about Thamellus is firstly their settlement. Barnacles have a short larval life, often non-feeding nauplius larvae, and then they must come in and they will glue themselves down, essentially attaching by their heads for a permanent place. So if the settling larva, the cyprid larva that settles, does not pick the right place, the barnacle is as good as dead. There are two hints as to a good place that barnacles use. One is, if there's another barnacle there, that's probably a good place. That one made it, so can I. So notice that they're aggregated in groups, very commonly. The second thing is a rough surface. So they're in grooves, oftentimes, lined up along grooves. You see them in straight lines there. So that's the issue with barnacles. And as they keep on coming in, their potential crowding exists, which I'll show on another rock. There's, again, on another rock, there's a larger white barnacle, that Balanus species. When it's with Thamellus, it could actually crowd it out. And then finally, on these Southern California rocks, there's a relatively uncommon reddish barnacle that has settled along here, Tetraclida, and that one, well, often you only see large ones, which suggests that it settles only sporadically every few years. Even these little Thamellus will live a few years there. Now, in addition to the settlement of the barnacles, there are limpets scattered around. And limpets use space, but in a very different way, in a space that competes essentially with barnacles. The limpets are grazers. So here is one here. It's a species of Lotia scabra, and this one has a homing base. It has a home scar that I popped it out of. I'll put him or her back in there. It fits it. You often can see that it's ground the edges of the rock, and it wanders around the free surfaces, but it can't really graze, scrape algae off the barnacles. So it moves around, and as it moves around, if it comes upon a pinhead barnacle, a recently settled barnacle, it bulldozes it off. So typically, where you see the limpets, there's some clear space that has probably been cleared by limpets. Now, the largest limpet in our area is the owl limpet. One of them is over here. Again, notice the settling in the grooves of all of the Thamellus. So Lotia has a home scar, and it lives many years. So it wanders around and removes the barnacles. As I walk around on these rocks, if I see a clear patch, I make a guess that there are limpets that are keeping it clear. If this one dies or is removed, you will see more barnacles settling in there. So you have two limpets with home scars. There are also other limpets that do not have home scars, but make use for shelter of crevices or under the muscles. So as you lift them up, you'll see other limpets as well, other species that don't have home scars, but are just going to places that are protected. The situation, so if we step back here, we see that we're actually looking at a place that is below a mussel bed. Oddly, This mussel bed will not be here if we are later in the winter when the storms have removed most of the sand. Maybe as much as a meter of sand will be removed, and then most of these limpets will slowly, because they can move down. So right now, because the sand is covering it, they've slowly moved up. This is Mytilus californianus. It's a large outer coast limpet, and by large, these are 20 years old. These are old animals. Notice a few things about them. The fresh shell, the new shell, the prismatic shell is black, but often it's disappeared because limpets have been grazing this these limpets probably live on this mussel shell for a long time. Here's one. I think you pop it off and it has a scar on the mussel. So the mussels are competing for space on the rocks, that's true. But for many of the limpets and many of the barnacles, they themselves are substrate. And so again, you'll see some which are maintained free by limpets, and others where the barnacles, here's a dead one, have taken over, and there's not much limpet space, but here is one there. Here's another good home scar limpet there. Here's one here. There are other grazers in addition to the limpets. There are some chitons. Here's a small chiton over here, and some snails as well. On this on another rock, we can emphasize some of these points and see a few other things. So here is another owl limpet. These, by the way, are the largest California limpet. They can get about double this size, but this is an old limpet. And it has been here for years and probably is maintaining all of this space clear. For some reason, we're not seeing hardly any of those little Thamylus barnacles, the grayish ones, but there are scattered Balanus barnacles, and quite a few of them dead. So again, this is a place where settlement hasn't occurred in at least a few years, or at least not successfully. And it certainly won't be successful with the owl limpet here keeping all of this clear. Among other things that are evident on this rock is there are patches of the gooseneck barnacle, Polycipes polymerus. So, like the barnacles, which are filter feeding and acquiring food from the water, as opposed to the limpets that are grazing on diatoms and other attached algae, these gooseneck barnacles have the same life cycle essentially as the acorn barnacles, like the Balanus. That is to say, a nauplius larva not feeding, a cyprid larva that is a habitat-seeking stage, permanent attachment, and then the juvenile and adult barnacles grow up. So with the gooseneck barnacles here, and they have these long stalks, hard to see here, but they're attached, is that they are very successful at settling in powerful wave hit hard surfaces. So you will see them on the most exposed outer coast. They can really handle just about anything the North Pacific can throw at them. And the reason they're always in clumps like this, they're not scattered about like the acorn barnacles, is their gregarious settlement tendencies are very strong. You hardly ever see any of them isolated. They're always in a cluster. There's a small cluster, bigger cluster, another cluster over here, one over here, and I am guessing that these clusters, again, I'm not aware of research on this, probably a good thing to study, that these clusters last for decades, for very long periods of time. So they have the same settlement issues in their own way that the acorn barnacles have. Large masses of the common clonal anemone, Anthoplura elegantissima. And the reason it's called the clonal anemone is because these patches are asexual clones. And Elizabeth Francis discovered many years ago that they have clone wars, and so there is a demilitarized zone between this clone and this clone. And when they are near the clone, if it gets too close, they develop these large, these short, stubby, powerful tentacles with big nematocysts, and they literally zap and cause necrotic tissues on the other members there. Some of these lines last a long time, and you will see limpets living in there, even barnacles settling, algae sometimes growing. That's a common feature of the clone wars. While we're looking at this rock, notice the high coverage of the thamellus barnacles here. This is a good example of where, if you're going to find a limpet, like right over here, it's settled on by barnacles, and it's probably trying to keep this little space clear. Anytime you see a clear space, there's some limpets. Among the other grazers here are these turban snails, and these are more common as you go further north. The black turban is Tegula funebralis, and they, like the limpets, they are also grazers on hard surfaces, and one of this size is probably in the vicinity of 15-20 years old based on age and growth studies up in Oregon. They also, like the mussels, can provide habitat for the small barnacles. I don't see any on this one. But again, oh, is that them here? Yes. Oh, yeah. Yeah. So that's probably a safer place for the barnacles than being on bare rock, because the snail moves around, prevents them from being buried, prevents limpets from bulldozing them, and so you see a lot of that as well. Use of these mostly snails with shells, but also the mussels as a habitat for these sessile attached barnacles. It's not evident here, but if we see enough of these, there are also some that apparently are nurseries for very young Laudia stragatella limpets that may specialize on settling on these, and then as they reach a certain size, they move off onto the rocks. solitary species, same genus, Amphipleura sola, that does not live in clones. And when you see them, like over here, you often see them lined up because they're often in a crevice or in some sort of linear habitat, fairly well spaced apart. Probably this is a result of interactions keeping them apart, and probably, and this is all supposition, preventing younger anemones to settle in there. These anemones are they're predators, and in a very nice paper years ago by Paul Dayton, he showed that their food habitat, their food items their diet was very similar to that of a starfish. But here's the key difference. The starfishes are actually predators. They're finding snails and mussels and eating them, killing them and eating them. The sea anemones are really more like spiders. They're sit and wait predators, and so something has to fall into them. They hunt nothing. And so their food contents, we know a lot about them because you can study them by sticking your finger in. Notice how far down it goes. Search around and see if you pull out anything. He wasn't eating anything, he or she. Nor was that one. Nor is this one. This, by the way, if you do it gently, is not really hurting them, but it certainly is molesting them. And so, 6 anemones examined, 0 food items. It gives you the impression that being a sit-and-wait predator in this sort of situation is a pretty hard life. There's a large chitin